four men who broke out of an Ohio jail. They were considered very dangerous.
These men are considered armed.
Hundreds of officers on a massive manhunt.
They are killers, they are murderers.
From digging underground tunnels,
beneath it, a tunnel that was his highway to freedom,
to helicopter getaways.
It was a spectacular escape that made headlines around the world.
And even mailing yourself to freedom. These are the most daring prison escapes in history. Some had help on the outside, while others took months or even years of careful planning. But how did they do it? Welcome to Explained. Let's start with the escape of Richard Lee McNair. McNair was raised by a police officer and was a highly intelligent man. But in 1987, he earned himself 2 life sentences and an additional 30 years for burglary at North Dakota State Penitentiary. McNair made his first escape attempt through a ventilation pipe in 1992, but was recaptured a year later. However, his attempt to escape from a maximum security federal prison in Louisiana in April 2006 earned him a name in history. McNair's prison job was to repair torn mail bags, and here's where he cooked up the perfect escape plan. He built a makeshift escape pod using some of the materials around him and fitted it with a breathing tube. One day, McNair hid inside the pod among some mail bags on a forklift. He knew the pile was due to be taken to a warehouse outside the prison. Once he heard the warehouse staff leave for lunch, he got out and made a run for it. A police officer stopped him jogging beside the railroad tracks, and McNair actually managed to convince the cop that he wasn't who they were looking for despite not having any ID.
Do you have any form of identification on you?
No, man.
What's your name?
Robert Jones.
What's your address?
I don't have an address. I'm at the hotel. We're working on houses and stuff like that, the roofing.
What is? We got an escapee.
Oh, Where from?
Prison. Hey, this is Carl. Subject wear glasses? Nothing about glasses. How old is your guy? You're how old?
50. Born in 56.
Let me just verify. He says his brother's staying at the motel. Let me verify that. You know the bad thing about it?
What's that?
You're matching up to him.
Come on. We just got into town about a week ago, and he dropped me off to jog. I always jog about 12 miles a day.
I'm just doing my job, man.
I know you are.
If you do jog again in the future, carry some ID with you. Be careful, buddy.
Thank you.
All right.
Next is Joaquin Guzman, better known as El Chapo. El Chapo is the founder of the Sinaloa cartel and one of the most terrifying drug lords on the planet. El Chapo was first captured in 1993 and sent to Puente Grande prison. But despite being behind bars in a maximum security facility, he continued to manage his drug operations with ease. It was obvious that his connections were vast, and the threat of a cartel retaliation was enough to scare many guards into compliance.
Joaquín Guzmán. ¿Algún otro nombre? Archibaldo. Archibaldo. Se prefiere así, Joaquín.
In 2001, El Chapo's men bribed a guard to let him out of his cell and helped him escape in a laundry cart. Then he was wheeled to a parking lot where he got into the trunk of the car and escaped. But his greatest escape was yet to come. After being sent to Altiplano Federal Prison in February 2014, El Chapo simply vanished from his cell in July. Security footage showed him pacing his cell, and then this happened.
He sits down, appearing to remove his sandals, and then he vanishes.
Authorities discovered a 2-foot square hole beneath one of the showers. This led into a secret tunnel that the cartel had been digging for months.
Opening the tunnel up to the press, the authorities show a well-resourced operation with electricity, an air supply, and this makeshift minecart adapted from a motorcycle, presumably used to move earth and people along its rails.
This tunnel led to a cinder block house on the outside of the prison, and from here, El Chapo made his getaway. Up next, Richard Matt and David Sweat. Sweat began serving a life sentence in 2002, while Matt received 25 years to life in prison in 2008. They met at a shared workstation at Clinton Correctional Facility and began planning their escape. First, they requested to be transferred to cells next to each other. Then, they bribed a correctional officer named Gene Palmer and made another named Joyce Mitchell fall in love with them. The two officers ended up giving them small things like hacksaws, chisels, and lights wrapped in hamburger meat. And using those tools, Matt and Sweat spent months digging holes in their cells.
By February, he has methodically cut through the steel wall of his cell, 3/8 of an inch thick, and continues carving through the wall of his next-door neighbor, too.
Then they made their way down 4 stories and broke into a steam pipe which led to a manhole just outside the prison walls.
Sweat was down there multiple nights. And he did most of the work. And they cut through the pipes. They were just persistent.
If you've enjoyed the video so far and want to see more of these, hit that like button and subscribe to Explain. This next escape by Pascal Payette feels straight out of a movie. Pascal Payette was a French criminal who was sentenced to 30 years in prison. In 2001, he escaped Louis Ness prison after his friend on the outside got hold of a helicopter, flew it to the prison roof, and broke him out.
Spectacular.
2 years later, Payette managed to break out 3 more prisoners using the same strategy. Eventually, he got caught, and this time, the authorities played it safe and decided to move him to different prisons every 3 months. But in 2007, Payette escaped a second time using, you guessed it, a helicopter. During a Bastille Day celebration, Payette's men on the outside hijacked a helicopter from an airport near Cannes and took the pilot hostage. They landed on the prison roof at the start of the night shift. And in 5 minutes, the men used heavy machinery to break open 2 doors at the isolation ward where he was held. Although Payette was captured a few months later, he still holds the record for the most number of prison escapes by helicopter. Next is Clarence Anglin, John Anglin, and Frank Morris. Morris and the Anglin brothers were prisoners at Alcatraz Federal Penitentiary in the 1960s. Alcatraz was refortified in the 1930s and crowned the world's most secure prison. In fact, there were 13 failed attempts between 1934 and 1961, but this was soon about to change. The plan took months of preparation and was led by Frank Morris, but he needed help, so he roped in the Anglin brothers and a car thief named Alan West. The men stole spoons and saw blades, and every night over 6 months, they used these tools to enlarge the ventilation ducts in their cells while Morris played his accordion to cover the noise.
They literally drill small holes around the existing vent and then push that concrete in.
The ducts led to a utility tunnel where they stored an inflatable raft made of raincoats. They even made fake heads from scraps of paper and waste materials. On June 11, 1962, the team put the fake heads on their pillows and made their escape through the utility tunnel. But West got left behind after his cell grill got stuck. The trio took the raft, slid down a pipe from the prison roof, and snuck to the shore where they disappeared.
That legendary escape is still one of the greatest mysteries in American history.
Last is the ingenious escape of Frank Abagnale Jr. Frank Abagnale spent his early adulthood forging checks. He was also a master at impersonation and managed to pass off as a pilot, a university professor, and a doctor.
Well, as the pediatrician, probably, it was really ended up being the most easiest, which should have been the most difficult. I supervised 7 interns on the midnight to 8 shift. When I would be called to the emergency room, I'd walk in, there'd be 2 or 3 interns there, and I'd be called down, and I'd walk in, and I'd say, "What's the problem?" And they'd say, "Doctor, we have a severe incardio here with a..." I didn't know if the guy broke his leg, had a heart attack. So I would say, "Well, Dr. Carter, what do you think?" "Well, doctor, I would like to administer 30 cc's of this." "Dr. John, I concur." "Dr. Jane, I concur." "Gentlemen, have at it." And out I would go. Well, I became one of the most respected residents because I was the only one that ever allowed them to do anything without interference.
When he got caught, Abagnale was sentenced to 12 years and sent to the Federal Detention Center in Atlanta. Now, this was the early 70s, and it was a time when prisons were being heavily scrutinized by congressional committees. So when the U.S. Marshal forgot to bring along Abagnale's detention commitment papers, the prison guards suspected he was a prison inspector under contract by the FBI. Once Abagnale realized this, he decided to use the lack of documentation to his advantage. He got in touch with his friend Gene Sebring, who helped him create the fake credentials he needed. Sebring created 2 fake business cards for Abagnale. One showed him as a prison inspector, and the other was of an FBI agent he pretended to know. One day, Frank pretended to reveal his fake identity as a prison inspector to the guards. And he actually convinced them to let him leave the prison in a car to meet his fake FBI partner, who was actually Gene Sebring. And that's how he managed to escape right under their noses. There have been other famous international prison escapes over the years. This includes John Dillinger's getaway with a fake wooden gun, the Texas 7 who got away in a maintenance truck, and Choi Gap-buk who escaped a South Korean prison through a food slot in the door. Are there any other unbelievable prison escapes that you know that we didn't mention? Tell us about it in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe to Explained.